There is an old legend, Graham calls it, an old legend about a king who commanded his wise men to bring him one sentence that would be true in every situation. In triumph, in ruin, at a graveside. The wise men went away and came back with 5 words. This too will pass. At the summit of this book, Graham sets himself the same challenge for money. Confronted, he writes, with the task of distilling the secret of sound investment into 3 words, he ventures a motto. Everything the book has staged so far, the definition on the bench, the madman at the door, the cage, the 4 folders in the records room, he now calls one idea wearing different clothes. And the 3 words are these: margin of safety. Years after Graham died, his greatest student stood at a lectern and was asked to explain what his teacher had actually meant, underneath all the arithmetic. Nearly everything the student owned had grown out of the sentence he was about to explain, so he took his time with it. He reached for an image any child could hold. You don't try to buy a business worth $83 million for $80 million, he said, and congratulate yourself on the $3 million. You leave yourself an enormous margin. When you build a bridge, you insist it can carry 30,000 pounds, but you only drive 10,000-pound trucks across it. Stand under the span and notice what the spare 20,000 pounds of rating is actually for. It is not for the truck you can see. That truck was always fine. It is for the overloaded trailer nobody weighed, the rusted bolt nobody found, the flood upstream that nobody forecast, in a year nobody expected it. The engineer who rated this bridge was not predicting any of those things. He was declining to bet against them. That is the whole doctrine. Standing in open country. A margin is not a forecast that trouble will come. It is the decision not to need to know whether it will. Graham says it in one sentence, and it may be the most useful sentence in the book. The function of the margin of safety is, in essence, rendering unnecessary an accurate estimate of the future. Take the oldest example in his trade, the one he taught for 40 years. A sound railroad bond, by the standard in his own textbook, belongs to a company earning its interest charges 5 times over, not because anyone expects the earnings to hold, but so that earnings can fall, and fall badly, and the interest still gets paid. Look at the man at this desk. He holds bonds of a railroad whose next decade he cannot see, in an economy nobody can forecast, and he sleeps like a stone, not because he knows what is coming, but because he is arranged not to care. A recession can eat 3 of his 5 layers of cushion, and the interest still arrives. He never has to be right about a single year of the railroad's future, and the same number has already been read from the wreck side, in a drawer across town. A mighty railroad covering its interest less than twice over, held by buyers who needed everything to go right, and everything didn't. Then Graham names the margin's one master, and it is not the quality of the company. The margin of safety is always dependent on the price paid, he writes. It will be large at one price, small at some higher price, non-existent at some still higher price. Hold that against the era's favorite religion, that a truly wonderful company is safe at any price. The finest business in America, bought above what its future can plausibly deliver, carries no margin at all. The tag has floated past the weight, and the space between them, the only thing that ever protected anybody, is gone. Beneath every approach to stocks ever tried, Graham says, lie 2 schools, and every buyer belongs to one of them whether he knows it or not. The first school tries to anticipate, see the industry coming, pick the winner, ride the future in. The second school tries to protect, pay so little, against values so demonstrable, that the future can go wrong without ruining you. Graham's own shop lived its whole life in the second school, and he states its creed in one line. We were not willing to accept the prospects and promises of the future as compensation for a lack of sufficient value in hand. Remember the man at the airport fence, his boy on his shoulders, right about everything the sky would hold, and wrong about his stocks anyway. Prediction failed that man even when the prediction came true. Protection asks a smaller, homelier question, not what will happen, but how much can go wrong before it reaches me. And of all the questions asked on Wall Street, it is the only one whose answer can be checked, on paper, before the money leaves your hand. The margin has a companion, and Graham explains their partnership with a roulette wheel. A player puts $1 on a number. If he wins, the house pays him 35 to 1, but there are 38 slots on the wheel. The payout is smaller than the odds. The game is built crooked by exactly that sliver. The player owns, in Graham's phrase, a negative margin of safety. And now watch what spreading his bets does for him. Nothing. Worse than nothing. The more numbers he covers, the more certainly the sliver grinds him down. And if he covers every slot on the wheel, he has purchased a guaranteed loss of $2. Every spin. Forever. Now tilt the table the other way. Let the payout be 39 instead of 35, and the same arithmetic runs in reverse. Every additional number improves his position, and covering all of them guarantees a profit on every turn of the wheel. Which is why the man across the table looks bored. The house does not sweat the spins. It does not celebrate a win or mourn a loss. It owns a small, permanent mathematical edge, and it lets the wheel do the arguing. Graham's dry aside is that those two positions, the doomed one and the certain one, are simply the player and the house, sitting at the same table. Diversification is not an apology for ignorance, and is not a hedge. It is what turns one favorable margin into a business. Buy $1 for 40 cents and you hold a good bet. Buy 100 of them, as Graham Shop did, and you own the casino. One question has waited since the definition first landed on this bench. The thing that finally separates the investor from the speculator. It was never confidence. Every speculator is confident. Each one, Graham observes, feels the time is right, or his skill superior, or his system sound. Feelings, all of it, unsupported by any body of evidence. What the speculator cannot produce is the one thing Graham now sets down as the touchstone. To have a true investment, he writes, there must be present a true margin of safety, and a true margin of safety can be demonstrated by figures, by persuasive reasoning, and by reference to a body of actual experience. Demonstrated. On paper. Before the purchase. Watch the two objects meet. The three-part sentence in its worn type, and the measured gap between tag and weight. They fit because they were always one tool. Thorough analysis is how the gap is found. Safety of principle is what the gap is for. An adequate return is what the gap quietly becomes while its owner sleeps. Show the space between price and value, or admit that what you hold is a feeling. So Graham's summing up reads less like finance and like a shopkeeper's creed, and he gives it in 3 strokes. Investment is most intelligent when it is most businesslike. A business lives by reliable calculation. Operations based not on optimism, but on arithmetic. And a businessman with the figures in hand does not take the neighborhood's mood for an audit. You are neither right nor wrong because the crowd disagrees with you. You are right because your data and reasoning are ripe. One more scene, because this book kept its receipts to the very end. In the spring of 1972, with his final edition on its way to the presses, Benjamin Graham, 77 years old, stood in front of a lecture audience in a bull market. The room was full of people doing well, and what a room like that wants from a famous old man is a blessing. A nod, a chuckle. Some version of the rules have changed, and you have earned it. He gave them the grocery bill instead. No drama, no prophecy. An old man reading out arithmetic. Stocks were priced so high against their earnings that the old cushion over bonds had vanished entirely. In his words, you have a negative margin of safety on stocks. The player's side of the wheel offered to a room full of people holding chips. He did not tell them what the market would do. He had spent 50 years refusing to know that. He only told them what they were being paid to bear the risk, nothing, and let them do the subtraction themselves. It is not recorded that the room enjoyed it. Within 2 years, the market had been cut nearly in half, the worst fall since the depression that had made him. The book was barely off the presses before it was right, one final time. 3 words, Then, standing where the whole book was always pointing, build for 30,000, drive 10. The widow's small dull machine was a margin. The workshop's 100-strong boxes were a margin. The forbidden drawers, the grocer's question, the ledger that outvotes the doorstep, margins, every one. Different rooms of the same bridge. It was never a way of being right about the future. It is a way of surviving your own wrongness. And Graham, who had been wrong with the best of them once, and paid for it in 3 gray years, never asked his readers to be anything he hadn't first failed to be himself, which leaves the strangest story in the book, and Graham tells it on himself. In 1948, while the first edition was on its way to the printers, the man who wrote every rule in it quietly broke the biggest one. He and his partner put a huge piece of everything they managed, far more than their own rules allowed, into one single company. And Graham spends his last pages asking, in his own voice, what that decision really was, luck or wisdom, and whether anyone, even Graham, can tell the difference.